This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
It's 11:07 at WPSL 1590, the talk of the Treasure Coast. You're on Ask a Rabbi.
This is Rabbi Shafir Lobb from Chayim, as it says, your Jewish home on the Treasure Coast. This is I'm not hearing.
I'm not hearing you.
Yeah, I'm not hearing me.
There
we go. Mics are really good when you suck them to your face.
I was going to say, now, wait a minute. I pushed the button.
Yeah, there we go. Sometimes it helps. What can I say?
There you go. Okay.
Yeah, so we're just posting it. Why doesn't the technology understand what I want instead of what I tell it?
It's easy.
Yeah. I know. All right. Welcome to this session of Ask a Rabbi, and you are welcome to call 772-340-1590 and ask me a question. It is a beautiful Friday, and it is getting closer to the Festival of Purim, the festival, the when we celebrate Esther. And I was kind of interested, as I always do. I look through to see what the new songs are that people put out each year, because new songs come up, new things on the internet. Yay, world. And this year I noticed that the big theme is to remind women that they can do whatever they want. They can be what they want to be. They can stand up and be counted.
Naturally. That's always been the case.
Well, I understand that, and that's true. But it seems to be the major theme, focusing in on that aspect of the story, because it's the book of Esther. Esther is the main player in the story. She is raised as an orphan by her uncle Mordechai, and they live in the town of Shushan, which is the capital of Persia, which is roughly in the same place as Persia, as Iran, rather. In fact, the Farsi, Persia, that is the name for for Iran in Persia.
Gotcha. Okay.
In Farsi. And, yeah.
Yeah,
So-
she sounds kind of cool.
She is kind of cool. She's very savvy in an interesting kind of way. She's interesting in that she knows how to ask for help, and she doesn't put on airs. So there's the short version of the story is that the king, when he's drunk, which he frequently is in the story, he's almost always drunk, and there's almost always a drunken party going on. And he summons, somebody suggests that he show off Vashti to the other drunk men at his party. She's having a party with the women, and sends what are usually translated as eunuchs, one of the other genders, to go retrieve Vashti and bring her to do some dancing. And she says no. She's not going to, who can blame her? Who wants to go in to a party with a bunch of drunk men who are asking the king to see his wife dance? There's something wrong in that picture to start with.
You think?
You think. And
slightly twisted.
Right. And the funny part about this is that the king's advisors tell him she's disobeying her husband, and there's going to be havoc throughout the kingdom. Make it a law that every man rules his palace, which is an interesting concept. Why do you have to make that a law? Clearly, it's not the case, right? That's the sidebar of that.
That's a joke.
The whole book is a joke. The whole book, that's okay. Let's back up, because it is one of the 5 Megillah, the 5 stories in Scripture. They're not intended to be laws. They're not intended to be prophecy. They're intended to be a story with an interesting moral and lots of interesting pieces in it. And if ever there was a text that tries to make it really painfully clear that it's a joke, It's this book. You can't read it with a straight face.
Okay.
And it's extremely bawdy. It's in fact, so it's all about drinking and about women. And so here's a piece that many may not get, but it's an important piece. There is Greek culture throughout the Middle East by this time, thanks to Alexander the Great, who's come through.
Okay. You mentioned him.
Right.
Yes.
So he's already in the story. So Greek stuff, Greek stories, Greek gods, etc., have made their way into the Middle East and parts of Africa and all different parts of the world.
Greek debauchery.
Yeah. So there's the song that actually goes to the melody of the national anthem, right, which is the Ode to Anacreon, which says, I shall instruct you like me to entwine the myrtle of Venus with Bacchus's vine.
Whoa.
Okay. Yeah, that's not a genteel song either.
Good grief.
Yeah. That was the melody that Francis Key Bacon, rather. Yeah.
Francis Scott Key.
Francis Scott Key. Thank you. I knew I was doing that wrong. Thank you. Francis Scott Key selected,
And
actually,
you're not
in his
allowed to
notes.
have bacon. by the way.
That would be true. That's why I was wondering why it was there. But anyway, it is the melody that, according to his notes, he scribbled next to it that he thought would be appropriate for this poem. Anyway,
Good grief.
well, it was a popular melody, and stealing popular melody is not new. But one has to wonder how it. Never mind. Anyway, so right, the myrtle of Venus. Right, that's what Venus has, is her myrtle, and that is Esther's name. Right, it tells you in the story that Esther's name was Hadassah, which happens to be Hebrew for myrtle.
Oh, really?
Oh, so we're blending the, so it's a hint that perhaps she was beautiful, a hint that perhaps she was irresistible in her beauty. Whatever that, wherever you want to go with that, the story is just so juicy, to put it beyond words. But in any event,
Lady Gaga-esque.
yeah. Oh, yeah. Never mind. So the king banishes Vashti from the kingdom, and then he becomes lonely because now he doesn't have a queen. And so he has his folks gather up all of the eligible young maidens from throughout the kingdom, all 127 provinces in Persia, and then in his kingdom. And so, yeah, kind of interesting.
Who needs a queen? Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, it's the basis behind Scheherazade, that story, because each of the women has 6 months of preparation of oils and baths, and 6 months to learn how to please the king.
Good grief.
Okay. That's a year of getting ready. So we can imagine this is an ongoing process for quite a while.
So he's auditioning people by the hundreds.
Yeah, one a night. And if he doesn't call for her again, then she goes to the harem of women where the king has had a night with her. Whether he slept with her or not, it doesn't matter. He's been alone with her, so she now goes to the harem, to the other. So there's this facility of Vestal virgins waiting, and then this facility of not-so-Vestal ladies. Yeah.
Oh.
And so it is. It's the night of it's the Scheherazade story. And what's interesting about Esther is that she doesn't ask for any special makeup. She doesn't ask for anything special. She asks the eunuch in charge of the women what she should do to please the king. She asks that person's advice, and gets it. And again, we're dealing with somebody who is mixed gender. That's what the eunuch is. Think about it a minute. Doesn't take a lot of imagination. And so knows...
Wait a minute, back then?
Yeah, back then. Much more open and common than it is today.
Really?
Sarasim. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Well, there were a variety of different kinds. There were men who wore dresses. There were men who had equipment removed. There's assorted different things going on, and it's still... That's an older culture, and it's not new. LGBTQ is not new, folks. It's been around since dirt, and it's not dirty. God doesn't make junk. Period. End of statement. God does not make junk. And, the God of love cannot make somebody who would be tortured. So it's not an unnatural thing.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, she asks this person who clearly has additional information on how to please the king, what to do, and with that she goes and spends her night with the king, and he falls in love with her, and makes her queen, and then the plot thickens with Haman, and it's kind of interesting. There's a little subtle twist here that a lot of people may not pick up. There's Haman becomes number 2 because the king is so busy being drunk that he's really not running the country, and he pretty much leaves this to his vizier Haman to run, and Haman is stuffed with himself, to put it mildly, and he runs around and he tells people they have to bow to him, they have to do this, they have to do that, because he's such a great person now. And one of the people that he bumps into is Mordecai, who's the uncle who raised Esther, and Mordecai will not bow. And when he asks Mordecai why he doesn't bow, or the people around him ask, he says, well, it's because he's a Jew, and Haman is an Agagite.
A who?
Agagite, which is one of the peoples that Saul gets in trouble for not obliterating in the
world
wars.
Is that? I've never even heard of that.
Yeah, well, that's
term.
because most people don't read all of Scripture. Okay, but that's the reference
Guilty
to that.
as charged.
Yeah, right. So when Saul when Saul is told to kill the Agagites and to obliterate their stuff, he in fact doesn't. And he keeps the king alive, and he keeps some of the folks alive, and he keeps cattle and stuff. And he's supposed to obliterate everything because of how wicked this people are. We can get into a whole nother discussion about whether or not that's a warranted sentence, but in any event, it is the sentence, and it is not carried out. And Saul actually loses the kingdom over it.
Wow.
It's the tipping point for him.
So now where did the Agagites live?
Somewhere in the area of Canaan.
Okay.
And when that becomes Israel, it becomes part of Israel and Judea, and then it becomes part of Persia when Persia extends down.
Wow.
During one of the Persian Empire expansions, the one that led to 127 provinces, each with their own language and customs.
Oh, brother.
Yeah. So there's a whole lot going on in the story that's much more below the surface. And so there's this long-standing, the Hatfields and McCoys kind of thing going on between Mordecai and Haman. And Haman takes it and transfers it to all Jews. Right? If a Jew won't bow down to me because I'm an Agagite, then let's get rid of all the Jews. Right? It was the reason that Mordecai gives for why he doesn't bow down. Mordecai doesn't say because God doesn't want me to, or because Jews don't bow down. We acknowledge royalty, we'll courtesy, we'll do all those things. There's nothing wrong with that. That's not worshiping somebody. There's a real important distinction. One could argue that perhaps what Haman was asking for was in fact worship. It's a fine line, and you have to read between the lines. That might well have been what's going on there. Am I skipping out on the air as much as I'm skipping out on this mic?
No.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
That
'Cause
may be
it's-
your headset.
Oh, that could be. You know, we have assorted pieces of technology.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're right. I'm hearing it on the headset.
Switching ears and
Yeah,
all sorts
it's
of
doing
weird
all
stuff.
kinds of stuff.
Yeah, it's
So, anyway, so he convinces the king. He goes through this really elaborate picking lots, showing the role of superstition into this day on which all the Jews will be annihilated. And it's sometime in the future, so people can get ready to do this, and Jews can get plenty terrified. And of course, in Persia, once it's a law, it's a law. I guess it's a little bit like never mind. I was going to say ratifying an amendment, but we won't go there.
Thank you, ERA. Oh.
So, since that was the Ask a Lawyer today.
Yes.
And gotta love it. So
the Holocaust in World War II was certainly not the first.
oh, heck no. No, Purim goes into the category of Jewish holidays of they tried to kill us, we won, let's eat. Of which we have a number.
A number of holidays.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's a
my.
popular theme. Not so true with all the holidays. Some people would like it to be, but it's not. Yeah. What can I say? And so Esther is now faced with a quandary when she finds out about this. And includes her because she's the queen. There's a great line where Mordecai says to her, "Don't think that just because you're in the palace you're going to escape this law. It's a law in Persia that all the Jews will be exterminated on this day and all of their property taken," which was really what it was about.
Oh, wait a
A
minute.
little bit of ego too, but yeah.
I've heard that before from you. Show me the money?
Yeah, there's always money involved.
Wow.
And so Esther, and Esther brings up this interesting thing. She says nobody can come in front of the king unless they've been summoned, unless the king extends the golden scepter as a form of pardon. And so she fasts for a week and prays, she and her ladies, and then she chooses to go before the king to bring her request. And he knows that it's a request because that's his opening line to her as he extends the golden scepter. What is your wish? Whatever it is, Esther, I will give it to you, even up to half of the kingdom. And which is interesting, right? Because every man shall be the ruler in his castle or his home. But here the king is saying, what's your wish? Even up to the half of the kingdom. It's yours. And what she says...
man.
Here's the real kicker. What she says is, I want you and Haman to come to a private drinking party. And so they come, and then the king again says, what's your request? What do you want, Esther? Up to half of the kingdom. And Esther says, I'm having so much fun at this party. Let's do it again tomorrow night. And then I'll tell you my full request. So, he goes and he sleeps off the first night of drinking, and he comes back. It's the second night of drinking, and then she says to the king, my life is in peril. I'm in danger. I'm going to be exterminated. And the king says, who would do that? And Esther says, this guy right here, pointing at Haman. And at that point, the king becomes mad, actually exits out into the garden to cool off, and during that time, it's an interesting scene, Haman collapses at Esther's feet, at the foot of her bed, where she's sitting, to beg her for his life, because he can see that the king's not pleased, because he hadn't expected this turn of events. And the king comes back in off the garden to find him hanging on his wife. Not a good thing, especially not for a drunk king to see. And
Not exactly good for his health.
No, in fact, he gets hanged for it. And
Gee, what a
right,
surprise.
and because he was the inheritor of the wealth to be taken from the Jews, not the king. He had prepaid the king for the right to do this by giving the king money when the king needed it. And the return payment was all of the stuff that the Jews have, which clearly Haman had underestimated to the king. That's a backstory, but you can read it.
Wow, that's so
it's not
cool.
hard to figure out in the details of the story.
Wow.
And so, in order to thwart that inheritance, the king actually kills all of 10 of Haman's 10 sons, so there's no heirs.
Oh my God.
Oh, it becomes a bloodbath. And when he asks Esther, what do you want? And she basically says, if you can't annul this rule, then let the Jews defend themselves. Let them do a preemptive strike the day before. And the king says, of course, whatever you want, Esther, up to half of the kingdom, it's yours. And so everybody becomes afraid of the Jews. I can't imagine why.
So the king was not Jewish himself?
No, it's a mixed marriage. That little detail is usually not highly publicized. Yeah.
Oh my God. Oh.
But mixed marriages were they've always been there.
See, I thought that was something that's relatively
I think
new.
that it's how can I say? In the old days when it happened, you either were or were not part of the Jewish community. But now couples are trying to be part of both communities. And so it's a much more publicized, open thing. Right? You're neither kicked out nor forced to convert. You don't have to pick one or the other today. Yeah. Kids are trying to have their cake and eat it too. They're trying to be part of both. Or I'm going to teach my kid to be both. And I'm not sure how you really do that. I think what people who say that mean is we're going to have all the holidays in our calendar, but not that we're going to teach both religions, because there are some really significant differences at the very base level between the two. Not that one's right or wrong. They're just not right or wrong for the same person. And you can't both believe that Jesus is part of the Godhead and not believe that you can't have both beliefs. They're mutually exclusive. So, and you can, like the song of the orange and the green, it's not a matter of playing the flute or the harp. It's a matter of what do you believe. So you either believe or don't believe. And it was interesting. I had somebody ask me this week if people find happiness by believing in God in Judaism. And I'm like, it's not a question of belief. God's not. We don't ask Jews to accept any beliefs other than that God has no body and that there's only one creator God who created one universe. But you don't even have to believe in that one God. You can still be Jewish. And that bothers some people, I'm sure. Judaism says, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do, and in the doing, if we're lucky, we'll gain some understanding. So it's about actions. You find happiness by making the world a better place. That's the Jewish answer. You by moving.
It seems so simple.
It is so simple that it's so hard to grasp.
Yeah.
It's so simple
that
it's so hard.
Yeah.
And the reality is it's not easy to make the world a better place. That takes a lot of work. That takes constantly reminding yourself, am I choosing the best path? Am I just making a decision because I like this cute little blouse for $3 and I don't really care that it's a slave who had to make it for me? Or am I going to not buy the $3 blouse so that the people who enslave others don't profit? But then I have to research, what article of clothing am I buying? Same is true with coffee, tea, sugar, grapes, bananas. There's a lot of stuff that we eat that there's just so many unethical labor practices in them. It's not okay to oppress the immigrant. It's not okay. It's just not okay. It's not the best way to run the world.
Look at that device in front of you. I mean, there's so many stories about, the plants over in China making the phones. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And I look at clothing too. And it's not easy to find stuff made in America ethically or made in China ethically, because how are you going to, it's not easy to inspect in a country that doesn't like outsiders coming in and inspecting. And it's not that Chinese are inherently evil, because they're not. They're people, just like we are. It's that people who seek to inappropriately benefit on the backs of others, which has always been the argument of religious people. It's always been what religious leaders have opposed. It's not new, and those people are attracted to big money where secrets are held. The more secrets, the easier it is for an abuser to get a toehold. And whether it's discrimination, in my class yesterday, in my class at Kaiser, we watched the movie The Best of Enemies, which is the story of Ann Atwater, who was a black activist, very powerful woman in Durham, North Carolina, and C.P. Ellis, who was the Cyclops of the local Klan. And together they have to address, and this is a true story, they had to address integration when the black school burns and the black parents say, our kids need to come into the Durham school, the white school. And they have something called a charrette that is run by a black guy in Raleigh. So it's kind of interesting. Different parts of North Carolina have different levels of attitude.
The Research Triangle by Duke University,
Yeah, there's lots of stuff going on. And the reality is that when we are racist, there's one human race. And, to divide people by any kind of identity or skin color or anything, that is racist and that is racism, but it's one human race. So there you go, Whoopi. You can just go that way, and there's you don't have to have races in order to have racism. And that's the reality. It's the way the judgment's made.
It's funny you mentioned that movie. We saw that, I think it was 2 years ago.
It's a great movie.
Coach
The Best of
played
Enemies.
it on the bus for the kids.
Very.
And it was like,
it's amazing. I played it, and my class, of course, is mixed. Many different kinds of folks in my class. I have a relatively big class at Kaiser. Kaiser's classes are very small. And so, after the last stuff in the class was done, we had movie night in the afternoon and played that movie. It's a short movie, shortish. And I'll give you the technology story of that later. But the story is how these two individuals who were both racist. That's the other point. Just because you're black doesn't mean you're not racist. She's running around and she's calling all whites crackers. And she admits that.
Yeah.
All right. And it's only after this charrette, after the two of them got to know each other and got to discover that blacks and whites are, in the end, people. And that's what really matters. The key is to get to know somebody and discover who's what. And the white supremacists, right? That group, and there's representatives of that, of course, in the movie and in real life. And they've got two enemies. They've got not only the blacks, with whatever percentage they represent, but also the whites who are liberal, because that's their other big enemy. And between those two, there's clearly a majority. And so they're trying to jury rig the voting on this charrette. And they do that. They do that by intimidating one guy who owns a hardware store that he inherited from his parents. And his manager and most of the key staff are people who had been in the military with him who are, guess what? They're black. And there's a wonderful line in there. And C.P. Ellis, the thing that really turns him around is his respect for the military and his recognition for the tremendous sacrifice that military people make. And, this guy who owns the hardware store explains they're talking over the fence watching a ball game. And he says that this guy was in the foxhole with him. And it's the person he trusts the most after his wife. He trusts this man with his life, and he has saved his life multiple times. And so he's simply giving back. Somebody's got to be the manager. And he can't think of anybody he'd trust more than this black man. And you can see the wheels turning in CP's head. Claiborne Paul is what CP stands for. I used to work with a CB, Clarence Brook, once upon a time. But so C.P. Ellis has this respect for the military, and he comes to realize, with this guy's help, that black military members also give a full sacrifice. They give for others by doing right even when nobody's looking. And he finds that Ann Atwater does that. Right? Ann's, as I said, she's just as bigoted and biased as he is, which, it's an us-them kind of environment going on, so it's not surprising. She's an activist. If she's not careful, it's a natural byproduct. And you see her working through her own prejudices to try to understand what's going on and what the dynamics are.
But you really understand why she feels the way she feels.
Oh, you do. And you also see her coming to grips with her own prejudice.
Yeah.
Right? Because she comes to realize that CP has a son who's got some combination of autism and Down syndrome. And so he's in a special facility taking care of him. And Ann Atwater, without his knowledge, there's a scene that happens at the facility, and she arranges for the son to have a private room and to be cared for more appropriately to his condition. And CP can't afford it. It's an extra $75 a week, and CP is barely making ends meet as it is, because the gas station, and there's this interchange, interestingly, between CP and his wife, where his wife says, you could sell to all of Durham. And CP says, what would my clan brothers think of me if I sold to black folks? I can't sell to them. And in the end, so turn it off for a second here, folks, if you want to watch the movie. But here's the spoiler alert. CP does vote for the end to integration. He votes for that. There's three resolutions that the charrette comes up with, and it's the third one. And the vote comes down to him, and he votes to support it. So, and they go and they torch his gas station because of it.
Yeah.
But then Ann Atwater organizes the black community, and they all line up to buy gas from him to keep him floating. So we are all in a community, and that, I think, is the real point of the story, which is that whenever we allow our prejudices to cause us to short-circuit a chunk of the population, we are shooting ourselves in the foot. We are denying our society and our culture from being all that it can be, because we don't know who, when, and where has the key to solve the problems that we're currently facing. But back to the real bigots in the story, which is not CPL's. He acts it, but it's more so that he can be this position in the Klan than because he really believes it. And that's what comes out in the story in the end. He really is willing to judge people as people. But there are a couple others whose power base is even more dependent on keeping the blacks down, and they're the ones that are really obnoxious in the story. And so they go and they close this hardware store on a something that should have been grandfathered in, the space around the circuit board on the building. They close him down as a fire hazard and tell him when he fixes things, the store can reopen. So they're putting pressure on him on the night before the vote, on a Sunday before the vote.
Naturally.
Of course. The other one's even scarier, which is the woman who's a teacher. They come in, they break into her house, and they threaten to rape her if she doesn't vote against the... And interestingly, the hardware store guy still votes his conscience. The woman does not. She gives in to the fear. But they threaten her with a baseball bat and two guys in her house, and she's alone. So I understand her primal fear as well. And, yeah.
Yeah, for anybody driving around that has never seen that movie,
it's well worth.
It is a must-watch.
It's well worth the investment.
Oh, yeah.
To watch and they become long friends. It's based on a true story. C.P. Ellis is a real person. The best of enemies. I see somebody over there looking for it, and and if you want, put a link to one of the trailers for it on YouTube or something when you put it up on YouTube.
It was funny. I remember one of our players asking Coach, "Is that a true story?"
It is absolutely a true story.
Yeah, and that's what he said. He said, "You bet it is." And of course, if you watch the credits, they actually,
They've added an interview with Anne at the end of it.
Yes,
if
we
you
had
watch
that
it
on ours. Yeah,
if you watch it now.
Yeah, we had that on
And,
the video that we saw.
Yeah, and they've both passed on. C.P. Ellis passed at 2005, and Atwater Anne didn't pass until, I want to say,
10-ish?
Yeah, something in the tens.
Yeah.
But she actually delivered the eulogy at C.P. Ellis's funeral.
Mm.
They have a couple of quips from him, too. And the events in the story are factual. They really did happen. They really did put up Klan paraphernalia and literature inside the charrette because the blacks wanted to end the sessions with some gospel music. Because the local black pastor said, well, let's sing some gospel music to remind us that this is God's work. Powerful stuff. And there's a wonderful argument between the guy running the charrette and Ann Atwater where she's saying, it's not the same thing to sing music as to put Klan paraphernalia. And he says, it is, but if we don't give, we're never gonna move forward.
Wow.
So, and it's that kind of thing that I'm talking about. That's making the world better, is realizing that it's not about tit for tat. It's not about fair. It's about doing what's right because it's right and going to move things forward. And that's, C.P. Ellis knows that that's not fair. That's not a reasonable request on his part. And he's smart enough to ponder that, maybe not verbally, but ponder it. One of the other things that happens is a group of kids bump into the table and knock it over, the one with the paraphernalia and literature. And Anne yells at them. It's a couple of black kids running through the building. And she yells at them and makes them pick up the stuff, and she rearranges it for him. And there's a moment where she's just staring at the Klan outfit, at the sheets. Right. And, they didn't come up with that on their own, folks. If you look at Vatican II, you'll see that the bishops are all wearing white sheets over their heads. Look at the picture of the Vatican II.
Now you'll get me over there.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, Google that.
Yeah, I will.
It's surprising, and I show that in my comparative world religions class, because we talk about Vatican II and what's changing in the Catholic Church.
Oh, boy.
On the Christianity unit.
Oh, boy. Okay.
They didn't come up with it out of nowhere. It's just not what they were going to do. But, yeah, it's invoking it in their own way, the fear of the Inquisition, even though the Inquisitors didn't quite wear the white robes, etc. It's invoking fear. Fear is a very primal emotion, and it messes with a lot of wiring. It's why politicians like to keep people a little bit afraid.
Well, now that's interesting. Were the Inquisitors wearing red robes?
I'd have to look.
The Cardinals.
I'll have to look that up. I think they were, because wasn't.
Well, there's been a lot of discussion about that in Rome,
and reasonably so. So here I've got 15 minutes almost. I'm going to, and
You're
please.
dropping bombs here today.
I am dropping bombs, and anybody's welcome to call in at 772-340-1590. And if you'd like what you're hearing, if this is interesting to you, if it's something you want to hear more about, please consider sponsoring an episode or more of Ask a Rabbi. Call that number and talk to Greg or Carol. They'll be glad to help you sponsor an Ask the Rabbi session. And so here's the other bomb. Talking about history, because all of our histories have things in it that are not pleasant, that are not things we like. We all have a dark side, folks. And when we shine the light on that dark side, we make ourselves more whole. Because we're not praising it, nor, we're just acknowledging that it was, and that we can learn from it and not continue to do it. We keep it in the dark and it's going to keep growing. It's like a mushroom. It likes the dark. The dark side likes dark, and when it's shadowed and hidden, it tends to expand. And so what we as people need to do is to own our own stuff. None of us are angels. I'm not an angel. I'm far from it. I make mistakes and I make bad judgments routinely. I'm not proud of that, but I acknowledge it.
That's human.
Absolutely. If I wasn't human, I couldn't get better. Right? So those things are that's the fertile soil for improving myself. If I used to make a rash judgment, if I used to use some terms without thinking about it, without understanding what I was doing, if I would buy clothes just based on price, now I can change my thinking. I have a way to improve. I can be more cognizant. There's a line in Torah that says, Chatati v'lo yadati. I sinned because I didn't know. We all do that. Until we're made aware, we cannot repent. Because we don't know we did it, we can't repent, and we can't do better. So our dark side offers us the most fertile ground for improving ourselves, each other, and the world. Right? Whether that world is our family, our neighborhood, our city, our state, our country, the planet. Things can happen all over. What C.P. Ellis and Ann Atwater did changed Durham dramatically, but it also changed North Carolina, and it changed the U.S. It was the last place to integrate. That's something people don't get. It was the holdout. And that's important.
I remember a dear friend of mine who has since passed, Joe Morgan, the baseball player from Cincinnati. And Joe talked about breaking in with at the time, the Houston Colt 45s, and they were training in Georgia. And his first vision coming out of the dugout were all these Klansmen walking right behind the outfield wall, and his manager telling all the black players, you do not leave this complex, pointing to the outfield for that very same reason.
Yeah.
You will not survive. And that had to be so scary for a guy from California. It's like...
Well, yeah, there's another great movie that, 12 Years a Slave, where somebody is kidnapped from the north and sold as a slave in the south.
Oh, wow. I have not seen it.
Yeah, 12 Years a Slave. I think it's 12 Years a Slave.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's when people think they can own other people, that's wicked. That's evil. And whether it's own somebody emotionally...
Billionaires think that all the time.
Why do you think people say money's the root of evil? Okay, so,
There you go.
Money is the shorthand, the coin of power. And power is a very addictive substance. Extremely addictive. Probably more than cocaine or heroin. It's an extremely addictive substance. The feelings that the stuff that it releases in the body, the pleasure centers that it activates in the brain are just really addictive. And very few people can resist that. And it's important to keep an eye on reality and the humanity of humanity to balance that to some extent. And it's one of the reasons why the Bible says separation of church and state. Right? The Bible's very clear about that. The kings are for raising an army and going to war when it's needed, and the prophets and the temple are for the God connection. They're different, they're separate, they balance each other. It is really important to have somebody who can tell the person in power, I don't think that's a good idea. It gives some checks and balances. And our ancestors, our forefathers in America understood the importance of checks and balances. Why we have a three-part government. Yes, they modeled it on Britain. They modeled the president after the Queen. They modeled Congress after the House of Lords and the House of Commons, and they modeled the Supreme Court after the courts. And that's why, as Stewart has pointed out many times on Ask a Lawyer, when we don't have a good law in the books, they will go back to common law of England as the source, because our ancestors knew the British system. They didn't mind the British system per se, as much as they just wanted to be their own country. They didn't want the colonial ripping off of resources that was going on. It had just hit a point where the rich could not be rich anymore. And if anybody thinks that anybody other than the rich started the American Revolution, you're not paying attention. Read the story. It was the rich who objected to taxes and other curtailments that London, that England was putting, that the Crown was putting on, and by the Crown they didn't mean just the king. They meant the government of England was putting on the colonies.
Trying to say they weren't paupers?
Yeah. They whooped up the populace. Right? They convinced the populace that they too would benefit. But I do not for a moment think that most of the populace was educated enough to have any clue what was going on, because education in those days was not an inalienable right. It didn't become, I don't know when schooling became mandatory in the U.S., but it didn't start that way. Schooling was something that the rich got, and the poor just, oh well, you got what you got.
Well, now wait a minute. Just look at the same thing. If you want to say Beverly Hills school districts versus East L.A., you're going to have two
very different. Well,
totally different education.
You don't have to go that far. You could look in our backyard.
Yeah, I didn't want to go there, but yeah, no, I get it.
I'll go there. We have schools within any school district. Some get more money and others get less. And the way that money's apportioned, Governor and I are not going to get along today, I can tell. Does not...
It's not a first.
No, it's not. It's not conducive to giving the best education to all of our children. And, dang it, the resources are not that scarce. They can be shared. Teachers do not have to give of their personal income to try to bring their students up to a meager level. It was one of the things that came out in that Best of Enemies. The black school not only had old books, but the 11th graders were using 10th grade books. And that was one of the other resolutions, was should the city pay for a summer school that the black students would have to go to in order to get up to the level so that they didn't bring the high school down. And I think that's,
Hey, nothing wrong with that.
That's where we need to put our money, folks. And we need to get off of some of the standard. There's a need to measure, yes, but not to the point where we rate schools on it. And we need a more complicated formula so that, yes, that can play in, but it can't be the biggest portion of it, so that teachers feel forced to teach the test. Because we're not teaching children how to think. We're teaching them the answers to the questions. And that's just critical. It's just critical.
Yeah.
We need to get there. We need to raise our children to be the best thinkers they can be. And, yes, I'm a teacher. And yes, I do give of my personal income for my students. I do things for them. Not everything's covered by either IRSC or by Kaiser for the respective students. There are things that I do just to move the students forward, because I think it's important. I want my students to get the best education I can give them. And yes, I'm passionate about that. And I don't care who they are, what they've said or done. In the end, they need to move forward. They need to grow. They need to learn a little bit more about how to think.
But if we didn't have people like you who cared enough to help them along the way, we'd really be in bad shape. Probably.
And, I'm by far not the most powerful or best teacher out there. I'm working at being the best I can be. And I've got a long way to go, folks. I recognize that. But I care about my students. I really, really do. Both schools say that the students are primary, and to some extent they support those words. But in the end, it comes down to what the teacher does in the classroom that has profound effects on what happens to the students. And it was an interesting comment. One of my colleagues said to me yesterday, I said something about, I feel like I'm struggling to do everything that I need to do for my students. And they said, oh, no, I've seen your students leaving your classroom. They're talking, they're smiling, they're engaged. They're continuing to talk about the subject that you had in class. And I was like, because I don't see that, right? I just see the backs of their heads as they walk out the door. And I love my students. And I hope that they all get that. Not that there haven't been some problem students, and there aren't some that I'd love to drop kick somewhere. But
that's everywhere,
right?
though. Sure.
Yeah, and that's really just about the moment. If they come around, they can be great students, and it's not about worshiping me by any stretch of the imagination. It's not about, and nothing will turn me off faster than false compliments. I got radar for that one, folks. I've been flattered up one side and buttered down the other. I do not like false compliments.
Oh.
Give me something that I can verify is valid, that you like, and we can talk. But I'm not in it for the flattery. I'm just not. So yeah, I care about all of my students. I want them all to succeed, because only when our students succeed can we have the world that we ought to have.
Wow. Great show.
Thank you.
Oh.
Something I'm passionate about. So this is Rabbi Shafir Lobb for Congregation Eitz Chayim, and as we get closer and closer to Purim, we'll learn more about it. It's a fun holiday. Have a great week. God willing, see you next week.
You've been listening to Ask a Rabbi right here on WPSL, Port St. Lucie. Talk of the Treasure Coast, webcaster to the world on TuneIn.